Welcome to my show, Cultural Pulse, where we discuss cultural subjects impacting lives around the world. My name is Mucyo Balinda, your host, and today our journey is taking us to Kolkata, India.
Feel the rhythm, hear the beat, Cultural Pulse where we all lead. Together we rise, united and strong. In every word we find where we belong.
Culture is something we all share in common. No one is cultureless. It shapes our identities, our communities, and our ways of life. But as precious as culture is, it can also be a source of suffering for many when it fails to evolve with the times. In today's session, we're going to explore an example that starkly illustrates how culture, when not adapted to modern realities, can have devastating consequences. This discussion isn't just about examining the past. It's about understanding the impact of cultural norms on people's lives today and the urgent need for cultural evolution in a rapidly changing world. Let's talk about something that's not easy to discuss, but is absolutely necessary.
Thanks very much. Appreciate you joining us, Dr. Dhar. If you could lay it out for us, as per the autopsy report that we see, brutal assault on her private parts, and the way the family, the way they narrate how they saw their daughter is absolutely shocking. And more details coming up in the autopsy about what was found in her vagina, etc., that indicates that there could be more than one accused here. Why don't you elaborate?
On the night of August 8, 2024, a young woman named Debnath, after finishing a grueling 36-hour shift at a hospital, had dinner with her colleagues and then retired to a seminar hall in Kolkata, India. But the next morning, her body was discovered in a semi-nude state, showing signs of horrific violence. Her eyes, mouth, and genitals were bleeding. This tragedy is not just a story of an individual life lost. It's a stark reflection on the broader, pervasive issue of violence against women that continues to plague societies around the world. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how women are treated, not just in India, but globally. How do we respond to such a horrific acts? How do we address the cultural underpinnings that allow the violence to continue? This incident opens a necessary dialogue about the safety, respect, and dignity of women everywhere. The brutality of Debnath's death is shocking, but unfortunately, it's not an isolated incident in India or the world. Sexual violence against women is a pervasive issue, and details of this case remind us of the vulnerability that women face every day. The fact that this happened in a professional setting, after she had dedicated herself to a job that's all about caring for others, adds another layer of horror. It speaks volumes about how violence against women is not confined to any particular place or time. It's a constant threat lurking in both private and public spaces. What does it say about our society that a woman can be subjected to such violence in what should be a safe place? It's a question that goes beyond India's borders. This incident forces us to look at the systems that are failing women everywhere, whether it's in the form of inadequate legal protections, societal attitudes that excuse or downplay violence, or the lack of support systems for survivors. It's clear that much more needs to be done. In many cultures, including India's, there is a deep-rooted problem of gender inequality that often manifests in violence. This incident is a reflection of the dangerous cultural norms that can dehumanize women, reducing them to objects to be controlled, violated, or discarded. we have to ask ourselves, how are we contributing to these norms, whether through silence, inaction, or even perpetuating stereotypes? Everyone has a role in either upholding or dismantling the culture that allows such violence to exist. So, what do we do with this information? Awareness is the first step, but it cannot end there. There needs to be a collective demand for change, stronger laws, better enforcement, education that challenges harmful gender norms, and a cultural shift that genuinely values and respects women. Each one of us has a responsibility to speak out against violence, support survivors, and work towards a society where such a tragic death becomes unimaginable. Debnath's story is a painful reminder of the work that still needs to be done, but it can also be a catalyst for change if we allow it to be. Let's not let her death be just another statistic. Let it be a turning point. Now let's talk about the dangerous normalization of sexual violence in politics. We'll continue this conversation by connecting what happened to Debnath in India to something disturbingly familiar happening in the United States. Debnath's tragic death, where she was brutally violated and left to die, is a shocking example of the extreme violence that women can face. But it's not just an isolated event in India. It reflects a broader issue of how society treats women, and more disturbingly, how some voices in positions of power contribute to this toxic culture. Now, let's look at what's happening in the US, where the cultural conversation around women and sexual violence is being shaped by someone who has a platform that reaches millions. A certain political candidate who repeatedly uses lewd derogatory language about his opponents, especially women. This isn't just about off-color comments. It's about how these words normalize a culture of disrespect and, by extension, violence. When a candidate casually talks about grabbing women by their genitals or makes crude reference to blowjobs in the context of discussing his opponents, what does that say about the state of our culture? These aren't just slips of the tongue. They are reflections of deeper attitudes that dehumanize women, reduce them to their sexual functions, and in some cases, imply that violence against them isn't something to be taken seriously. The tragic death of Debnath in India and the crass language of a US political figure might seem worlds apart, but they are connected by a thread of cultural tolerance for the degradation of women. When leaders or those in power use their platforms to spew harmful rhetoric, it sets a tone. It tells people what is acceptable. And when that rhetoric involves sexual innuendo or casual reference to violence, it contributes to a culture where such behavior is normalized. This normalization is dangerous. It's the same culture that allows a young woman in Kolkata to be brutally attacked without the immediate outrage or systemic changes that should follow. It's the same culture that lets a political figure in the US make jokes about sexual violence and suffer few, if any, consequences. What does this say about us as a society when we allow such behaviors to go unchecked? Whether it's in Kolkata or Washington, D.C., the failure to hold people accountable for perpetuating this culture of violence and disrespect has real consequences. For Debnath, the consequence was her life. For women in the US, the consequence might not be as immediately fatal, but it's still damaging. It's the perpetuation of a culture where their bodies are objectified, their voices are silenced, and their safety is compromised. We need to start holding people in power accountable for their words and actions. If a political candidate uses language that degrades women, They should be called out publicly and consistently. This isn't about politics, it's about human decency. We also need to foster a culture where respect for women isn't just an afterthought, but a fundamental expectation. Debnath's story is a tragic reminder of what happens when society fails to protect its most vulnerable. Let's not allow the same dangerous attitudes to flourish here in the US. Let's make it clear, sexual violence, whether through words or actions, has no place in our culture, whether in the halls of power or on the streets of Kolkata. Thank you.